So next up we have Rieger from Cornell University, and where she's Associate University Librarian for Digital Scholarship and Preservation Services.
Good afternoon. So far we have had almost a dozen very interesting presentations, and most of them very specifically focused on the theme of today, which is research data, access, and preservation. I'm going to go a bit to a different area, and hoping that we can learn from each other's experiences. And I will talk about ArXiv.org, which is housed at Cornell University Library. And last 3 years, we have been going through a process that we characterize as ArXiv Sustainability Initiative. And I'm going to talk a bit about ArXiv, but my goal is really to generalize some of the principles we have learned in regard to sustainability. And my hope is that, as we curate and as we archive different genres of information, whether it's research data or e-prints, that ultimately we are trying to create a cohesive, integrated scholarly communication and scholarship environment that we all will benefit, kind of knowing what's happening in different domains. So basically, sustainability is capacity to endure. And I think, as I said, having 12 rich presentations before me, inevitably I'll be repeating some of the concepts that have already been mentioned. Sustainability has many dimensions. Clearly, the concept is coming from biological world, but you could take it to information systems and look at its technical, sociocultural, policy, and business approaches. And as I go through my presentation, actually, I'll be giving some examples. And I characterize stewardship as really the responsibility to maintain this vision, this integrated, holistic sustainability approach. Some of you may already know about ArXiv.org, but it has been kind of like a poster child for open access world. It's 20 years old. It was established by Paul Ginsberg, who is a physicist and an information scientist, and has been hosted at Cornell since 2001. Actually, we just recently celebrated its 20th anniversary. It includes a large quantity of e-prints, and that, as you can see, with 76,000 new submissions and 50 million downloads, it's a pretty much proven destination for scholars. Now, ArXiv.org, because it began from the high-energy physics community, still its reputation is more, in a way, connected with high-energy physics. But as you will see from this diagram, the content types are definitely growing rapidly. As a matter of fact, the largest growing community now is mathematics. So finance, biology, statistics, math, high-energy physics, astronomy, so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting about ArXiv is, as I said, Cornell University Library has been the house for this highly used repository, but the use is very global. As you can see, it's distributed globally. For instance, 8% of use is coming from the UK, 6% from France. And if you look at the EDU, by the way, this is based on institutional downloads, only 0.5% use is coming from Cornell University Library. And actually, we came up with a list of 200 heaviest users. Of course, we have institutions like Max Planck, CERN, Oxford, Cambridge, mainly very international at the top. And Cornell is like 28. And that's where the service is at Cornell University Library. This is going to really take me to the budget. As a part of this whole trying to understand ArXiv from service perspective, especially looking into sustainable issues, last 3 years we have been trying to develop some cost models to understand and document how much money we are really spending on ArXiv. So if you think about, just as an example, I put here calendar year 2011, we spent close to $450,000. So imagine, Cornell University Library, last 3 years, unfortunately, we had 20% cuts to our budget, and we are maintaining a system that's almost $500,000, and our library is the 23rd or whatever, 26th in the world. So this really became an issue after a while as we were trying to make these very difficult decisions at the library. Before I move forward, another issue I want to highlight in this diagram is, I know it's difficult to see, but ArXiv's technology is extremely simple. As a matter of fact, it's a 20-year-old technology, and we are just last 2 years moving into an open source digital library platform called Invenio. And that, of course, programming is important. We have a programming team, but at the heart of ArXiv, it means of its success principles is user support through really, human touch. And as this diagram shows, there are 2.25 FTE user support, and this was last year. Actually, we are just in the process of hiring another person. So, frankly, I try not to reduce sustainability to finances, but at Cornell, one of the reasons we started looking at ArXiv, more focusing on ArXiv's business model was some financial, problems that we were facing. Therefore, we established, from a financial perspective, an internal model where we identify the top 200 users and we send them all a letter explaining the situation and our intentions and ask them to start contributing annually, depending on their use tier, from 2,300 to 4,000. And at the same time, Cornell University Library made a commitment to cover 15% of the annual expenses plus indirects. And this 37% is really what is negotiated by Cornell University Library. It's the overhead administrative, the facilities, custodian, legal support, so on and so forth. So we are now, this is the 3rd year. As I said, we started in 2010, this fiscal model, and it has been quite successful. But I must add that the 2010-2012 period has been really seen pretty much as a planning stage. And during this time, again, just reminding me that this was not only about money, it was about the whole service structure and how we are managing it. We have been looking at ArXiv staffing, evaluating its infrastructure, functionality, and actually a very interesting part of it is talking with publishers and societies to understand how we can better work with them. And again, I want to emphasize that my goal is just to move on and generalize some of the lessons we learned from the Sustainability Initiative, but very quickly, we are just getting ready to establish what we call our kind of more durable, more long-term sustainability model. Financial support will come from Cornell University Library. We engaged an organization called Simons Foundation, a foundation. They had a matching grant of close to $3.5 million for 10 years. And then member organizations. We are turning ArXiv into a membership organization where we will ask top 200 to be paying, again, it's like $1,500 to $3,000 a year to be members. And I will have to give you the documents on the webpage that describes, what does it mean to be a member, privileges, so on and so forth. But for the sake of managing my time, I will move forward fast. I also will show you a diagram with the governance, because what had happened is, as we began the Sustainability Initiative, as we started engaging institutions saying, listen, it's costing the library almost $500,000, we need to work on this together. But very quickly, what it turned into was, okay, you're asking me for money. What is in it for me? Not only about my users, but what is the transparency, accountability? How do you run ArXiv? What am I going to get as members? And I think these are very healthy questions that at Cornell are instrumental in bringing further efficiencies. So when we began in 2009, as I said honestly, at the heart of the problem was this budget cuts too. But as we began the initiative, and when I look at it today, the fiscal problem was really at the tip, just the tip of the iceberg. Because what we have noticed is that sustainability stewardship had so many directions that it was not only financial stability, but from interoperability to understanding designated communities, it had many components. So basically it was really creating an infrastructure. So just to share with you, some of the principles that we really felt important, we felt that they were important during these last 3 years. I just highlighted 5 of them. There are many others, and let me go through them. Again, some of them have already been discussed today through the earlier presentations. First of all, I cannot really highlight enough the importance of integration into academic community, and ArXiv is an excellent example. So many people ask, why is ArXiv so successful, as we are knowing that other IRs, even some subject repositories are somewhat struggling attracting content and being a natural destination. And at the heart of it is, it was really formed, as I said, by Paul Ginsbach, who happens to be a scientist. It took 10 years for the system to come to the library, and by then it was such a scientific-driven organization that library, gratefully accepted that it was already a functioning system informed by different cultures. And also, again, as I pointed out, the technology is not fancy. We have good IT staff, but it's more the sociocultural bandwidth that really makes it very strong. And user-based strategies, I will actually give an example from our governance slide for that. A big part of our sustainability initiative has been looking into governance issues. Some of you may be familiar with the track process, trusted repositories, assessment, and certification process. At the heart of that certification process is to look at an organization and understand, actually, to look at a repository and to look at it from 3 dimensions to understand if it's a trustworthy destination for digital content. Organizational, technological, and also information object at a very micro level. And mandates are important, and governance is very important because in a way they really create the framework for envisioning the future, implementing this vision, and sustaining the process. As I mentioned, after we opened ArXiv to our partners, I think it was a really very productive dialogue that, I don't want to use the word force, but that really, in a way, motivated us to implement some tenets, which are being participatory, accountable, transparent, responsive, and inclusive as a service, as an organization that runs a service. Again, I don't want to get into too much detail. I'll give you the URL if you are more interested in this, but we have now a 4-page document that clearly identifies the key principles of ArXiv from an institutional perspective. General principles such as being open access, editorial, who creates the standards for depositing, economic, the finance, and the governance. This is all, as I said, kind of a bit work in progress too, but just to show you a quick example, when we look at the governance from a high level, we are envisioning 3 groups. Cornell University Library, which with its day-to-day operation, managing moderation of submissions, providing interfaces, maintaining partnerships, and then 2 advisory board, scientific advisory board, providing advice and guidance on intellectual issues, such as proposing new subject and disciplinary domains, making recommendations about some IT improvements that may either bring efficiencies to the moderation process or to the ingest process, and a member advisory board composed of folks, the libraries and research centers who are members, and for them to be able to contribute to the operation of ArXiv through the expertise that libraries bring, whether it is repository architectures, standards, interoperability, the broad scholarly communication cycle. And another element that we are trying to work on is organizational chart. Again, this practice may remind you the track process where governance structure is an important part of sustainability. In use of technological platform, there are so many issues, and I think I really kind of jam-packed this slide. But I want to highlight a couple of these sub-bullet points. The first one is relation to other repositories. With the member organizations, at the top of our priority list will be to understand how institution repositories interact with ArXiv. At Harvard University, you know, they are physicists, mathematicians, biologists. They're expected to contribute their content to IR at Harvard, and by the same token, their heart is in ArXiv because that's where their communities are. How could we bring synergies, further synergies, establish whether they are technical or they are cultural? How could we bring these repositories closer to each other? Another issue is lowering the barriers and contributing content, and this is a really tricky one. There were so many good examples today. We were talking about metadata, how, you know, the scientists, they don't really give us the metadata we need, or we're talking about citation principles, how, you know, scholars will be adapting. The fact of the matter is, I think there is definitely a symbiotic relationship that technologies, professions has impact on practice of scientists, but also scientists have practices on some of the systems that we are developing. Again, going back to institutional repositories, and our kind of in certain, especially at Cornell, realizing that scholars are not going to come by themselves unless you put some either motivations or some services in place. So at ArXiv, just to lower the barrier of contribution, we ask for minimal data. And one of the problems we are running into now is looking at ArXiv and understanding submissions by institutions. Because, you know, as I said, we ask for minimal data, some of them are using their Gmail account, so on and so forth. Therefore, we are also very fond of initiatives such as ORCID that try to disaggregate author name to help us lower the barrier of contributing, but try to develop some standards to help us be better repository maintainers. ArXiv predominantly is a repository for e-prints, but it also supports supplementary information objects such as, you know, images, so on and so forth. And last 2 years, we have been collaborating with Data Conservancy and using ArXiv as a preliminary ingest point for research data. So this is yet another example of the importance of different repository worlds talking with each other. You know, I think, again, from scientist perspective, many of them are not going to see that there are 3 buckets. You put your images here, research data, and here's ePrint. How do we work together in means of not only lowering the initial barrier, but also from cost effectiveness perspective? How could we manage this together? Not everybody knows this from a surface, from a distance, but ArXiv has an endorsement and quality control system. It's not peer review, but every article submitted is reviewed just to make sure that it has the core scientific elements that you know it was submitted by someone in an institution considered a scholar. And I quickly mentioned that last 3 years, as a part of the sustainability initiative, we hosted a couple of meetings with publishers and societies that represent content in ArXiv. Elsevier, Springer, Wiley, American Physical Society, there were 8 of them. And we have a common agenda that we all, in a way, although non-profit, profit, difference, at the end, we all want to support scholars. And one of the issues that really became, raised to the top of our common research agenda was version control and persistence. And this will again happen with research data, just like preprints. You know, we have in ArXiv sometimes, you know, 5 versions, and then there's a published version that there's not even a copy in ArXiv. But how do we maintain the integrity of this chain? And this is my last slide, but it's a really important one, that we are all in the business of scholarship, but whether it's scholarship or an entrepreneurial organization, it requires a good financial plan. And I think we all will greatly benefit from understanding how to create business plans, to be able to articulate the value of a given service, bring in stakeholders' perspectives, and financial planning. I must admit that it took us almost 3 years at Cornell to really come up with budgets that are inclusive, to understand how much money we are spending. And of course, communication plan in means of keeping both the key stakeholders and also internal decision makers that are providing your funding. Thank you. I guess we will have a couple of questions, or otherwise we'll save the questions for the end, right? Yeah. Thank you.